So I'm going to go to our spreadsheet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through this relatively slowly. And I want you guys to write down these steps as well as you can. Okay. That way, when you guys get into your groups, you'll have like something to reference to get yourself started. All right, cool. So I'm going to do the eye color again, just because we already know what it should look like. So we have something to kind of verify. We have something that will allow us to like make sure we did it right. Okay. And basically, when we go to make our table, that frequency table using Excel, okay, I chose one strategy. There are definitely more than one strategy for doing this. So, you know, if you know another way, that's perfectly fine, as long as you get the same thing. What I'm going to do to create our table, our frequency tables, I'm going to use something called a pivot table. It's called a pivot table. And I use these for categorical data, partially because I feel like you can create some fairly advanced tables reasonably easy. Although I'm only using a fraction of the things that you can do in a pivot table. So the beginning of every single pivot table is we need to select all of the data. Okay, and so this is the first step that's a little bit weird, because normally we're used to, okay, if I want to do something with eye color, I'm only going to select eye color. But when we're doing pivot tables, I'm going to tell you to select the entirety of the table. Okay, so from this corner up here at A1, all the way down to this 204, which is the end of the weight variable for this data set. Now, for those of you who have bad trackpads, okay, this can get really tough, especially if you have like, you know, a really large data set. So another way you can select everything is by clicking on the gender or clicking on the upper corner, then going down to the lower corner and holding down Shift. So you hold down the Shift button. I wish I can kind of show you my keyboard. I'm holding down the Shift before I press this button, but if I hold down the Shift before I press the last cell in the bottom corner, it will just highlight everything between. So that's like a nice way of doing it if you have a crappy trackpad, which I know like a good chunk of Chromebooks have crappy trackpads that you can't like drag really easy. Okay. All right, so now that I have everything selected, I'm gonna go to data. So data is where pivot tables live. And do you see where it says pivot table? That's where I'm going to go. Okay. So now we have like, basically we're going to have two little dialogues here. The first dialogue is basically just to kind of tell us, I'm sorry, let's say it this way, just asking us where we want this table to go. For our purposes, I want to put it on the same sheet. I don't want my table to make a new tab and like basically a whole new sheet. Our tables aren't complicated enough that we need to do that. So I'm going to say existing sheet. And then notice it's just like kind of asking a question. It's like, okay, well, where do you want me to put it? Well, you tell it where you want it to go, basically, by clicking on this and then just finding a blank spot. So I'm going to find a blank spot down here. Okay, and notice how it just recorded that blank spot. And now I'm just going to hit OK. And now that I have that there, I'm going to hit create. Ta-da! Okay, no, nothing's happened. One of the most frustrating things about certain things is that there's like going to be multiple steps. And so you won't get like instant kind of like, oh, it's already there. So now basically this table is sitting here and waiting for us. It's basically sitting there waiting for you to tell it, what do you want me to count? And how do you want me to count it? Okay. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to rows over here. Okay. We're going to go to rows. And on the add, right, we're going to click add. Notice how it highlights all of the variables that we had. So here's where we're going to choose the variable. Okay, here's where we're going to choose the variable that, that we want to summarize. So I'm going to summarize eye color. And notice the second that I click on that, now I actually have all of the labels. Okay, so brown, green, hazel. So this is exactly what we saw earlier. And this is going to be really beneficial on a big data set where you don't know all of the labels right off the bat. So this will find all the labels. Okay, but notice there's no counts. The counts, okay, are going to be given by what you choose down here for values. So the rows are basically setting up the labels, and the values is where we set up the counts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go add, and then I'm going to pick eye color again because that's what I want to count up. I want to count up the individuals by eye color. So I'm going to hit that, and notice right there, the table has now been filled in with all the counts. Like immediately. We have 19, we have 1 and 1. Pretty simple. Okay? All right. Now, you may ask, how do we get percentages? Well, percentages are actually pretty easy to get from this count. So down here at the values, you see where it says eye color? Do you see how it says show as? When you click on show as, default will show the counts. And right here, it gives you the option of percentage of row, which isn't what we want because basically it just makes everything 100% because each row only has one member. Percentage of column, which actually works. In this case, we want the percentage of the grand total. And that actually goes through and it makes the percentages for you. So notice how those match what we have earlier, 90.48, 4.76, and 4.76. So about 90.5, 4.8, and 4.8. Okay? But I'm going to go back to the counts because I want to make my graph. So if you guys remember, we have one step that is all about making a table. And then the next step is going to be about producing the graph. Fortunately, this is actually going to be really easy. What you have to do is highlight the table. And I'm going to highlight everything, but not the grand total. And the reason I don't want to do the grand total is because what that will do to my graph is it will make my graph think I have this extra category called grand total. Like it's like another eye color. That's what the graph will think. Okay? We want the graph to only look at brown, green, and hazel. And we want it to include those counts. And now I'm ready to go to insert chart. Do you see this little thing that looks like a bar chart? So once I have that highlighted, I go to insert chart. And what's going to happen is it's going to make a guess as to what kind of graph they think is most appropriate. And I'll be honest with you, I think they chose a decent graph. I think a pie chart is actually not a horrible graph to try to summarize this. You know, it definitely shows you really easily that most people have brown eyes, or a dominant number of people have brown eyes in our class. But that's not what we're going to create. We're going to create a bar chart, okay? And now I'm going to apologize ahead of time for to everybody. And what I'm going to apologize about is that there's not consistent naming in statistics across every package. So when I go over here, do you see something that looks like a bar chart? It's this one right here. Looks like what I drew as a bar chart. Well, they call that a column chart. Okay? So you're going to pick a column chart if you want a bar chart. And what they call a bar chart is really the same graph, but turned horizontally. So when it's horizontal in Excel, it's a bar chart. When it's vertical, it's a column chart. But for our purposes, we call this a bar chart. And I really apologize for the whole entire world for not being consistent. I hate that. It's actually one of the things that's most frustrating when I'm trying to show people how to use different tools, is when different tools call them different things. It was actually a huge, well, not a huge shock, but it's actually one of the biggest adjustments that you have to make when you teach from different books is the slightly different terminology. Statistics, yeah, we don't have great. We haven't been able to like in algebra and in calculus. Like calculus has been going for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and so they've really kind of largely centered on common terms. Stats, it's not there yet, but I'm going to go ahead and click column. Okay, so there's my bar chart, and it's my bar chart with frequency. With a frequency scale. And there are a few things that I definitely would change. Like if you see down here, E color, I'd probably change, double click on that and call that I color. I would definitely change the overall title because honestly, do you think it's a horribly effective presentation to walk up to somebody and say, count A of E color versus E color? I mean, like people are like, what the fuck does that mean? So here's where you put a nice descriptive things like I color of fall 2020 math 200 students, something like that. And then over here, I'd probably change that to frequency or count, just count. Count's probably easiest. And then probably the only other thing I would change is you can also change things like the how the vertical axis is shown. I like to change the ticks more than anything else. So instead of like counting by fives, I think it's easier to read maybe if you count by 2 and have kind of one line in between. I think that actually makes it really nice to read. But these are all kind of just subjective kind of changes that you can make. Okay, and you make them just by clicking on the scale and going down the grid lines. Okay, so now the question is, how do I make my relative frequency? Well, what I'm going to do is basically take the table that I have, and I'm going to go ahead and copy it. So right-click, copy, and then right-click, paste. Sorry, actually Control-V. They make you do Control-V. There it goes. Oh, wait, hold on. That doesn't behave like I thought it would. Hold on, let me go back. Of course, when I'm demonstrating this, it doesn't work the way I thought. There it is. And now the reason I'm just duplicating this is just largely because I don't have to reselect everything. I'm using the same exact data, the same exact variable. The only thing I need to change is instead of show as default, I'm going to show as the percentage of the grand total. And now when I go to highlight this and insert my graph and picking my column chart,